Oh, it does them both at the same time? All right, so welcome.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Jim Duncan. I'm the State Lands Manager with the Division of Forests and the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation. And thank you, Chair and Committee, for the invitation to be here today and speak to you on forest management on state lands. It's a great topic, wide ranging, and I hope to cover some ground today with you all and give you a quick overview at a high level and answer any questions you may have.
Jim, you know that we took a little site visit
Yes.
a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I see some of you in different clothing, but
You were there.
The temperature issues than we had out there where it was frigid, so it's nice to be inside today. So,
Oh, you were out there bundled up.
yep, yeah, it's hard when you have hard hats, coats, and everything else. It changes a little. So good to see you again. Appreciate you having me. I'm going to walk through what does our specific program within the division do in the forestry state lands. What are state lands more generally, and then what types of forest management do we do on those state lands? And I think a really good, interesting point to discuss with this committee is how we plan for that state lands forest management. And then finally, what else are we managing on state lands within that forest beyond the forests themselves? As I go through, we think about a spectrum of work on state lands, from acquiring them to planning for them to implementing projects after project review. So I'll be kind of touching back to these major steps that go through some of the planning and implementation steps around forest management. So you'll see this graphic again. But first, starting with who am I and what does our program do? We are a small but mighty team of about 19 people, of exactly 19 people, managing all public land management duties on state forests, as well as assisting on state parks and state wildlife management areas with our colleagues in the Division of Parks. We have 5 stewardship foresters. Each one oversees a district. And within those districts, we have state lands foresters and outdoor recreation specialists dedicated to doing all of the state lands management in those districts. And we hire an array of seasonal staff to do trail work, to do additional forestry work, to coordinate other recreation projects, to support that endeavor. So most of us are there in hard hats and vests, and it is a small but mighty team with a big set of duties, but a real good focus on high quality science-based land management and forest management. So we have our foresters in the center, but it's a much larger group engaged in this. We are just one program within the agency, and it's really a larger agency endeavor. And I want to highlight and appreciate the role that all of our agency staff play in doing state lands forest management. We work with our Division of Lands and Administration and Recreation to do planning and administration activities. They support us in statewide recreation planning and interfaces. We have many programs in the Forest Division that support us through the forest health, forest economy, watershed forestry, and we provide place for those programs to do their work as well. We work with the Division of Parks quite a lot on helping share equipment, share implementation work, and we coordinate work across the fee area, state park boundaries into the more dispersed recreation areas. We also work with our fish and wildlife colleagues, the ecologists, the wildlife biologists, fishery biologists, to both develop management plans and then implement those plans. We also conduct all of the timber harvests on fish and wildlife properties as a partnership with Fish and Wildlife. And with DEC, they're involved in planning, project review, permitting, technical assist for a variety of activities. And then outside of our agency, we couldn't get a lot of the work that we do done without our partners, especially in the recreation sector, but also our partners who help us design new forest management strategies and advise us on how to get the work done, as well as conduct research on state lands that's going to support future forest management. So a much larger endeavor beyond my team of 19, we have this great agency-wide support for state lands management. It really is a comprehensive interdisciplinary approach. And everything I talk about from here on in, it relies on many of these people all the time. So while I'm talking about our program, we're part of a larger effort.
Representative O'Brien?
Jim, who during our field trip was in your specific division?
So everyone in that trip was within the Division of Forests. I'm trying to run through all the people who are there. Everyone was within the Division of Forests across several programs. And then, so yeah, that was the 2 foresters in the district, the recreation specialists and the stewardship forester were all there, as well as our forest economy program manager, our climate forester, our director of forests, myself, and our communications person. So those are all forestry staff.
And you're within that.
Yes, so I oversee the stewardship foresters, they oversee the state lands foresters and the recreation specialists.
Thank you.
Yeah.
for clarification, with some other partners, like from Audubon, others
Yes,
were there but not staff or.
yes, sorry, that was, I was thinking only of the agency folks. There was two representatives from from Audubon there as well. Yeah. So what are state lands? State lands are one piece of the conservation landscape within the state. We have about 239,000 acres owned in fee by the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation, split between forests and parks. One of our state parks, Campbell's Hump State Park, is about half of that acreage. So we manage some of that state park acreage directly from within the Forestry State Lands Program and advise on the rest of that state. There's over 105,000 acres of wildlife management areas and riparian management areas that are owned in fee by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, where we have a collaborative management role. And we have a small but significant sliver of environmental conservation ownership, Department of Environmental Conservation ownership on the lands around DEC-owned dams that are also part of state lands. So when I talk about state lands, it's this set I'm talking about. We're not including easements or other forms of conservation interests that we hold. Our state land staff is focused on fee ownership primarily. We obviously work on those other ownerships, but this is where we put most of our effort.
The distinction here is between who owns the land rather than who manages it. So does Fish and Wildlife actually own the land, or is it state-owned land that Fish and Wildlife manages?
So the Department of Fish and Wildlife is the state is the owner. The Department of Fish and Wildlife is the steward and the carries the title to that land. Yeah. Okay. So they acquire land and we acquire land.
Does it also include water, like parts of Lake Champlain or big lakes too?
No, this is really terrestrial. So we up to the mean water level, and then we intersect with public waters and all the regulations there. On state lands, we have a range of assets. I pulled some numbers because it always is humbling to think about what our team is working on. We have 2,200 miles of externally facing boundaries. So that's boundary that butts another landowner that we have to maintain and monitor and manage to make sure that we're being good neighbors and that we have good neighbors. We have 900 miles of roads on state lands, 590 miles of trails. And I was surprised to run the analysis that we have 93 out of 97 natural community types in Vermont represented somewhere on state lands. So we have a wide breadth of plants, soils, environmental conditions, a lot of it forest, but not all of it. So it's really kind of a wide ranging environmental context on state lands that our team is managing. And all of that, most of that exists within the forest community. So when we talk about forest management on state lands, I'm going to speak specifically about vegetation management, but we are always kind of intersecting with these other issues. Who are our neighbors? What are people using the land for? And who else is on that land?
Representative Price.
What's a natural community?
Oh, sorry. A natural community is an assemblage of typical vegetation, soils, hydro conditions that define kind of a similar collection of plants and animals that are likely to be found at that spot. So it could be some of the plants are there and some aren't, some are, but that community would develop into kind of a final state. And the Fish and Wildlife Department defines and manages that natural community mapping. But it's a good way for us to understand the productivity of a site, what species we should expect to see there if left to its own disturbance pathways, and how things like water, soils, and elevation affect the communities that live on there. So some examples might be a rare natural community might be like a cliff talus slope where you have lots of stunted vegetation and big rocks. Another one might be a hardwood seepage swamp where you have really wet soils and hardwood typical species in that area. So it's a combination of site conditions and the species that would be found there.
So there are four that just sort of randomly don't fit into the state-owned land.
And I didn't go to look at what those four were, so that's an interesting question. But there tend to be kind of broad categories. There's some very unusual ones that don't appear very often, but they tend to be in those kind of rarer landform types like elevation areas that we do capture. So I don't know what the four are, but I could get back to you on that.
Thank you.
So what do we mean when we say active forest management? First, many people think of timber harvest. That is one tool that we have. It includes a number of ways of manipulating vegetation to either address deficiency or degradation or to achieve an enhancement or a benefit that you want to get out of the forest. So timber harvests are one tool that we have. We also do invasive plant treatments. We promote wildlife features like food producing trees, such as oak or beech or apple. We do open field maintenance, so we maintain habitat structure within that forest matrix that provides different kind of conditions for bats or for birds. And we also do non-timber stand management, so tending to, again, release certain species and promote their growth, or to remove a species that may be competing for those resources that you want to improve the quality of the stand. So all of these efforts to actively manipulate vegetation is what we talk about when we think about active forest management. Timber harvests have gotten a lot of attention on state lands recently. They are a really effective tool in our tool belt for a number of reasons. We can use timber harvest to restore and accelerate recovery from past land clearing. This is something we have a lot of on our landscape, where we have forests in kind of a single age class. I know there's been testimony to this committee earlier on kind of the broader uses of forest management for affecting past land use, and this is one area where we can use this tool. We also can address human introduced threats to forests like invasive plant presence. We can accelerate the accumulation of old forest characteristics to do restorative forestry to try and move a system towards having more downwoody material or standing dead trees. We can enhance forest health and resilience to future climate stresses by diversifying the species on the site or adding more age classes and size classes. We can also produce forest products sustainably from these stands, and in many cases, quite well. And we can create and maintain and enhance wildlife habitats that exist in forests of different ages, species compositions, and sizes. And for timber harvest in particular, they may be our most affordable tool to accomplish some of our restoration and landscape management goals at scale. They can be done at cost or even at generating revenue to the state, but ultimately they operate at a scale that we can't do with people and contracts in the same financially responsible way. So while we're doing that, scaling up that management, we can also provide wood products to Vermonters that they value, from flooring to heating to electricity and other durable wood products coming off the state lands that I would say are some of the best managed and most responsibly produced wood in the state. So I really feel proud of the wood that we produce off the state lands, and we get all of these other habitat, ecosystem, and wildlife benefits out of it. I'll say revenue never drives the proposal of a timber harvest on state lands. It is a nice outcome, but we aren't looking to maximize revenue. We're really looking to use the timber harvest to accomplish our other management goals. One area that we do a lot of management is for climate resilience. So some of the ways that we use forest management to improve climate resilience on state lands will increase the amount of woody debris that's available on the ground in active management areas, for recruiting new seedlings, for providing microhabitats for smaller mammals. We really take care to look at the site and match the equipment to the site so that we're putting equipment out on the ground that the site can bear. We've got an opportunity to improve our road infrastructure and have been making good roads to improving water quality, road infrastructure durability on state lands. And we managed to improve forest structure and age diversity from what it has been. And then finally, managing against non-native plants, pests, and pathogens is going to be an ongoing effort for us within Vermont and in forests on state lands for a while. We have new pests coming in, and we'll continue to have to manage for the ones that are here. And that is an important component of climate resilience, preserving those native species and locally adapted trees to persist on the landscape.
Can I just ask about managing for climate resilience and how long that's been part of the thinking? I'm not sure whether 5 or 6 years ago I'd even heard the term climate resilience until I came to Montpelier, that is. So, and experts were probably way ahead of me. But how long has that been part of forest management at the state level?
So I would say it's actually been part of our forest management for decades, and in the term responsible sustainable forestry. So I think when we look at the things that I'm listing here are things that we were already doing before it was specifically denoted as having a climate benefit. Sometimes we can do these things, we can do more of these items and for climate resilience benefit, but keeping a diverse age structure, promoting forest health, resisting invasion by non-native plants, increasing our deadwood and standing dead in the stand has so many other benefits that foresters have been doing that when they think about wildlife, when they think about water quality goals. And there's also carbon and climate change resilience benefits to those as well. So I would say like climate smart forestry, climate resilient forestry is something that looks a lot like good, responsible, sustainable forestry. We are also now able to call out specific actions where we can do more to increase climate resilience benefits of a specific harvest or activity. So within the state lands program, as I've seen it in the 3 years that I've been running this program, and looking back, these actions have already been called out in prescriptions before they had a label like this.
Thank you.
So some mix of information. I just thought it'd be helpful to talk about what scale are we doing this on state lands. We've had a couple other things happening, like a couple of years of flooding that have gotten us away from some of our forest management goals, but we've been still able to make progress on existing plans. We've offered 27 sales over the last 5 years. We average about 200 actual acres of harvest boundary per year over the last 5 years, and with an average revenue of about 148,000, and that ranges widely year to year and site to site. We have 3 climate change adaptation research sites that have been installed and another one that's going in very soon. So we're able to contribute to some good cutting edge research on how forests might adapt to climate change in the future. And aside from timber harvest, we've done over 200 non-commercial projects in the last 5 years, from hazard tree removals to timber stand improvement, releasing mast trees like apples and oaks, and maintaining fields and roadsides within the forest context. So it's a wide range of work. Timber harvests are a part of it, but we do a lot of other work.
Representative Morgan. Did you have a question? No. Oh, yeah, sorry. Representative Lipsky then.
Yeah, the 3 climate change adaptation research sites installed, where are those 3 located?
So one is in Groton State Forest, and one is being developed in Camel's Hump State Park at the Winooski Valley View Sale. And I'm blanking on the location of the 3rd site, and I apologize. And I'm going to ask Commissioner Pisco. I was like,
I had those 2 in my head too.
yeah,
The 3rd one.
and I'll have to get back to you on that.
That's unique. I just got a book, the Hubbard Brook Research Project for decades, Gwen delivered it. But that's really important information to, as those research sites develop or you start getting data, really appreciate sharing it with this committee and the broader forest committee. It's really interesting.
We're working on, there will be one in Barry. And yes, as far as Representative sharing the results, these are early harvests that are looking at what happens when you add enrichment plantings to, we're very lucky in the northern hardwood forest, especially, we get great regeneration, but we know we have issues with beech, and we don't know what's going to happen for some of these trees that regenerate now and future climates. So we're having enrichment plantings that look at how well those plantings do compared to native regeneration. And that'll take some time to develop results, but we're seeing from other result work that's being done in New Hampshire, we're excited to see how that'll look on our forest soils.
But so these actually involve active reforestation versus planting.
Yeah.
It's something we sort of dismissed as way redundant because we have so much dormancy or something.
Yeah,
But so it's be very interesting.
yeah, I think we're looking at some novel sites or areas with a lot of regeneration challenge, high beech. Can you plant climate adapt or species that might be adapted to future climate conditions, kind of jumpstart that process of adaptation by 80 to 100 years? Yeah, and I'll get back to you on the other side. I apologize, I can't remember.
Representative
May
Nelson.
not be a lot.
Thinking of your hazard tree removal and power lines. Up in the Northeast Kingdom, there's an active power line right away, clearing. And it's working. We don't lose power near as often as we used to because they kept those right of ways clean and keep trees from falling on the lines. Do we have a lot of miles of power line running through our state forest, and do they actively manage that like they do other places, or do you you have to go through a whole plan to keep those cleared out.
So I don't think we have a lot of power line that runs directly through forest, not along the roadside. And usually the utility maintain that right of way.
On the
clearance right
roadside.
to be, and on the road and also usually along the power lines. If there are any, they would presumably still have that clearance right. The analogous example I can think of is the pipeline in Victory State Forest and Victory Basin, where there's the pipeline has a right to clear that.
Yes, they do.
So there's one I can think of, Mount Scottney State Park. They also maintain a right to clear that power line as
Yeah.
well.
They also have the Velco line running through quite a section of lands up there in the kingdom. So that goes on just like it does on private lands.
Yeah, that's an eased use that's already accomplished, accommodated and thought about in the plans.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. So this is some of the forest management that we've done. Much of it is under what we call long-range management plan. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we do long-range management planning and plan for project implementation as well. So this is a little bit more administrative, but really gets at the heart of kind of making these interdisciplinary decisions about long-term, large-scale landscape management. So here's where we are in the pipeline, looking at long-range planning once the parcel comes into ownership. So why even do an LRMP, or what we call an LRMP, a long-range management plan? It's our way to take a look at the landscape scale context and resources on that parcel. It lets us balance multiple uses in a thoughtful, forward-looking way. We can get a better sense of the public desires and needs for that parcel and how we can accommodate those given the missions of the departments owning the land. And we can provide opportunities the public seek for activities on those lands that's consistent with our mission and policy. And finally, this is a real succession tool of having that continuity across staff. What was the vision for this particular part of the landscape? How are we going to get there? The long-range management plan provides that direction and that guidance to future staff. It's a really critical tool or a step that we do. We are fortunate to have, I mentioned 5 districts. Each of them has a district stewardship team. So this is an intra-agency team of natural resource, culture resource experts that represents all 3 of our agency departments. That includes wildlife biologists, foresters, recreation specialists, ecologists, watershed planner, fisheries biologists, cultural resources specialists, and legal specialists. And their role is to develop these management plans and put them out for comment. They also then do the implementation and planning for those management of that land and respond to requests for uses of state land. They also evaluate proposed acquisitions to add to state lands. They play a really key fundamental role in management planning and execution. And I think this is a model that's that we're kind of lucky to have in Vermont. When I go and talk with my counterparts in other states, they don't have the same integrated planning and execution framework that we do in all cases. And I think we see a lot of benefits from being able to work with our teams across the agency at an interdisciplinary level every month on these planning efforts. So this is a huge asset that Vermont brings to the table. When we develop a long-range management plan, we start with resource assessments to understand what are the fisheries conditions, what are the water conditions, the forest conditions, recreational opportunities currently on that parcel. We then bring some of that assessment information out to the public and do scoping, say, what do you see in this? What do you want to get out of this? How do you use this parcel? What do you want to see from this parcel in the next 20 years? From those 2 pieces, we develop a draft management plan that we put out for public comment. We receive comments and evaluate any changes needed for the plan to get that to address any public comment, propose a revised management plan, and then at some point, if that plan is approved, it gets signature by agency leadership. So it's an iterative process, takes us several years. This is the long-range management plan is the source of most of our management, so this is a key step. We're looking forward to having some additional capacity in the future with BHCB funding for some state lands planning work to kind of accelerate us and help us get through a couple other plans that are on the horizon. So key step, I put the Worcester Range Management Unit up there as an example. This is one we recently did for 18,000 acres that really is going to guide a really important parcel in the state forward for the next 20 years. Looking at where we are with planning, we've got about 35% of our acreage is covered by an active plan. We have about 10%, 15% that's in progress. And a large chunk that we would say is needed, either that we've exhausted all the implementation actions or it's been long enough that we want to redo the plan before we start implementing. And a couple with no, about 10% with no plan because it's been newly acquired or hasn't been a priority for planning. So as you can see, we have a lot of work to do on planning, but by making regular progress on that, we can keep up with our management.
Representative O'Brien.
Do you revisit the long range management plans like every 10 years, like current use?
So the general time, we don't have an explicit expiration date, but the general idea is around 20 years is how long those assessments and implementation plans are considered good for. Some plans, it takes us a while to get through. For those who are on the site visit a couple weeks ago, that was a plan that was, or a harvest that was scheduled for over 10 years ago. So we do sometimes get behind in implementation. But every project goes through an additional layer of review. So if a project has been sitting for a while, we would look and say, does this actually need to be redone before we would go forward with the implementation?
Representative Nelson.
Have you ever thought of hiring or contracting with private sector foresters to aid in like marking timber? Which, you know, I understand the need. I understand that for state lands, coming up with a plan is more involved than it is on private property. Okay, I think I can make that assumption because you go look at everybody's values. But when it comes time when you've got the prescription drawn out, have you thought of, or do you contract with private foresters to aid in getting that work done of marking out the timber so your team can work on the next plan?
So we don't currently do that. It has been discussed in the past. And it's certainly, I think, an area we could grow towards contracting out. Right now, we've been contracting out forest inventory for developing plans. That's
Okay.
what we started doing so that we can speed up the process of collecting the resource assessment. We've done that with forest inventory and with some natural resource or natural community data collection as well. That's another way we can gain some efficiency and free up our staff to do marking.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good question.
Lipsky.
On that, Jim, there's a lot of presentations at the Forest Summit where they were talking about using AI and drones to do some rather detailed analysis of forest stands. But is that something FPR is leaning in that direction or engaging in?
It's not an area that we're actively researching and
forcing you, I'm just
scoping. No, it's a
curious.
good question. There's a lot of really great tools that marry remote sensing and field-based data that can speed up your kind of assessment, quantification of the forest stand conditions. A lot of them are proprietary products, and I think we're seeing a lot of churn. What I've seen is a lot of churn. We are looking at our forest inventory process and how we can speed up forest inventory and really focus our efforts in the area where getting someone on the ground has to happen, and trying to collect as much information about those from like tree height LiDAR and other tools at the desk so that we aren't putting people out in the field. Because the most time you spend taking an inventory point is getting to it. So the more that we can use these other tools to focus our field time at the right places, the better we'll be. So that's a working group that we're using right now to try and find some of those efficiencies. And I think tools like that would certainly be something we'd look at in that group.
Thank you.
What happens when, you know, lately we've been hearing a lot about old forests or forests with old forest characteristics. So when there's maybe a policy adjustment like that at FPR, do you go back to your, you know, all your blocks and try to identify like where could management best, you know, get to that point? Or do we need to completely change, you know, this long range management plan for Yellowstone State Park? State forest.
That's a clarifying question. So you're saying if there was a direction, a policy shift to manage old forest or old
Say to get
forest
from 1% to 10% or, you know, a goal like that.
So I think the site conditions and the natural community information that we have that kind of informs where different types of management are prescribed on state lands already would take into account a lot of that need. We see that our highly sensitive management areas where we have unique biological resources or unique natural communities already receive a high degree of management sensitivity designation, which means we would be less likely or not going to do any sort of active forest management in those areas or very light touch forest management depending on the site. So I think it would really depend on what the directive was and how widespread it is on the landscape. When we develop long-range management plans, they conform to the policies, guidelines, statute requirements of the day. And then when we do project review, if there's additional requirements that have come up, and I'll cover project review post long-range management plan in a second, you'll see that there's a whole nother round of review that something like that could also come in and affect us more at the project development stage. But as far as allocating land to different management categories, I think that the process we use is actually is so focused on the actual resources and the conditions on the ground that I think it would largely support some policy shifts. It just depends on the nature of the shift. If we had to go back and reevaluate plans, it's instructive watching what the U.S. Forest Service was doing with their old growth amendments, plans for their forest plans, much larger context, much more difficult, but we saw some ways that you could do kind of across the board amendments. I don't know how that would work. So lots of speculation there, but I have to say that I think we'd have to look at each plan and what the policy directive is. Speaking of land management classifications, part of the planning process is allocating these. I just wanted to throw these up because I think this does get a lot of discussion as well recently, how we allocate the types of management we'll do on state lands. First, we have in blue what we call highly sensitive management, where there's some uncommon or outstanding resource that has the primary purpose of management. So any management that's done is primarily to support that persistence of that resource. In light green, we have the special management section, which is unique or special resources. So there may be something like critical wildlife habitat or wildlife corridor. Other management could be compatible with that, but it can't undercut that resource. So we think about that. Any other management kind of has to support that primary important consideration of special management area. General management is fairly resilient sites, open to lots of different types of management. In the Worcester Range, you can see it was these dark green portions. And then purple is our intensive management parking areas, state parks, fire towers, heavily visited, heavily developed sites. So looking across data we had for 36 plans so far that we've been compiling, we've got about a quarter of that in this highly sensitive management area. And we've got about a quarter in the special management area and 40% in the general management category. So it's a pretty good split between these categories in terms of how we're thinking about the level of management intensity we might do in different places.
I was confused at first, so I'm just going to say the blue means something different in the two different maps.
I didn't think about matching those colors. I apologize. So if you ignore the colors, just go by the labels. General management on the left-hand side, highly sensitive is the upper right quadrant, and special management is the lower right quadrant. Sorry, the colors did not do me service there.
But in the map on top, the highly sensitive management area is majority of that. Looks like anyway.
Yeah, it's over 50% of the Worcester Range.
That would be the top.
It is. There's a natural area designated up top Worcester Range, and then there's high elevation forests on the sides, and then the headwaters of Moss Glen on the north side that were added to the highly sensitive management area for that plan.
So would that mean in the highly sensitive area, would cutting be off the table?
Pretty much, yeah.
In that?
Yeah, the only active management we would do would be invasive plant treatments. If there was a forest pest issue in the future, I could see there might be the need to cut certain trees. Yeah. But there's no salvage logging, no timber harvest planned in the blue.
No salvage on.
Representative.
This is a great visual for those who hear of, the threat of active management. If you consider the general management, the darker green, it's really more like 10% or 12–15% of the entire massif that makes up this Worcester Range that's even being considered for active management. So it's a conservative and an intelligent plan. not leaning to anything that's threatening to all these other values.
The team will appreciate hearing that. Thank you.
It's a great visualization. And the higher elevations and slopes are good in all those senses.
Yeah, I drive that road every day.
You drive the eastern edge.
Yeah, Route 12.
Is there any pink at all? Like my eyes aren't good enough.
State
Oh,
park.
oh, there you go.
By Elmore.
Yeah,
Like
Elmore State
Elmore,
Park
yeah.
is within this management unit.
And then are there's two blocks in sort of landlocked there that are purple, a different purple, maybe.
These
Yes, yeah,
buildings.
yes.
In holdings,
Those are buildings.
in holdings, so other land owners within.
Oh, right, okay.
Oh, there you go.
There's some active management going on the east side of Route 12 right now. Down through there.
Okay, are we good to move on to the next slide?
So at the long range management plan level, when we talk about forest management, we see some goals coming out like this: promoting healthy, diverse forests, addressing climate change risks or resilience issues, managing invasive plants, pests, and diseases, providing forest products, and supporting diverse plant and wildlife habitat. This is one of the climate change research sites on the top. You can see on the left-hand side, someone planting seedlings for that enrichment planting experiment. On the top right, you can see this matrix of forests that we're creating at different ages. At Groton State Forest, we've had patch cutting to address beech that is then followed up over time. So we're creating these diversity of age classes and structures across the landscape and addressing our regeneration challenges. So really like that picture to show we're creating different ages of forest. And at the Coolidge State Forest on the bottom right, you can see these patch cuts kind of breaking up the forest and creating that landscape of structural diversity according to the long range management plan that was envisioned. So Coolidge is about 20 years old or 15 years old, 17 years old. Groton is going to be renewed soon. So we see the forest management being applied to the landscape starting to play out over time. So after we have a long range management plan, all of our activities, whether they're timber harvest, trails, roads, go through a round of project development and review and what we call the annual stewardship plans. These are our yearly work plans, what we want to get done on state lands. Folks from the agency put their plans into the annual stewardship plans, and then those are reviewed and approved by district stewardship teams, and then by what we call the A&R lands team, which is made up of the division directors from our 3 departments or their designees. And then we go through any permitting resource expert review that needs to be done to review those projects, and then they're put out on the land. For timber harvest in particular, these receive everything here is pretty much the same for all other projects except for pre-sale inventory. So when we get to developing a timber harvest, we've done a kind of a course level inventory at the unit scale for the Worcester range. And then we go out and look at a particular treatment area and do a much more detailed forest inventory to collect information on species, volumes, and ground conditions or generation. There's ecological review by the state lands ecologists to look for rare, threatened, endangered species, to identify natural communities that need protection or buffering. We go through bat review, which includes acoustic surveying for potential presence of northern long-eared bat or any bat, and incorporate any findings into the planning. We look at historic resources and then wetlands, streams, any other resource reviews or permitting that we would need to do. So once all of those reviews are done, that information is compiled by the forester into a prescription. And in developing that prescription, they have to outline their existing conditions on the site from all those resource reviews, the long-term goals of doing active management there, moving the stand towards more diverse age classes, addressing poor quality beach in the overstory or understory, whatever the case may be. They have short-term goals such as using the cutting to achieve a new state on the site. They have to list what that is. They provide their marking standards, so how they'll indicate to an operator what to cut and what not to cut, where to be with equipment, where not to be with equipment, and any operational conditions like whether it can operate in summer, winter, avoiding trucking conflicts with buses, whatever the case may be. If there's operational consideration, that goes into prescription, and that's reviewed by the stewardship forester and the district stewardship team. And then we put out what we call a prospectus, which is essentially an RFP for an operator to cut the sale. So that includes information about the species and our product volumes that we estimate on the site, operational requirements they have to meet, and any deductions. And I put deductions up here because I think this is another benefit, a privilege we have on state lands is to use timber harvest to achieve other goals. We might do some road rehabilitation on the site, fix up old skid roads or logging roads that are potentially water quality issues. They can upgrade those sites. We have donated firewood to multiple wood banks from timber harvest, and that's a deduction that the logger doesn't have to pay for. So we can use a timber harvest to get other goods off the site or to fix issues on the site with the operator while they're there. And getting that person to get out on the woods to do that work while not on a timber sale can be prohibitively expensive. So we get a lot of benefits other than the cut wood from these harvests. So put all this up to say there's a lot of other steps that happen after a long range management plan that really focus on the site and making sure that that site can provide a good timber harvest for the operator, be a good value in return to them, and then also achieve our goals. So I should say, minus the pre-sale inventory, pretty much everything else is the same on those review sides. So every project that goes through our annual stewardship plan gets ecological review. If it has a potential impact on bats, we would look at that. So we do look at every project from all the different resource angles and decide what additional reviews they need. And finally, on the implementation of our large-scale forest management, when we do a timber harvest, we have a showing and award of the contract. We'll walk the potential bidders through the site, talk about what's on the site. They make an informed decision about what to bid, and we award the highest bidder, the highest qualified bidder, the contract. Our foresters are out on site multiple times a week, or at least once a week, multiple times a week, doing oversight of operations. At the end of the harvest, the operator has to do the closeout and reporting, and eventually we do reinvestment of the revenue. This is a close picture of a crossing that's been closed out according to AMP standards. And we reinvest revenue in other state lands needs. We've used money from timber receipts to treat invasive plants at Albrook Dunes. We've used money from state land timber sales to restore steps at a historic fire tower. We've done apple tree release. We've been able to do other habitat improvement projects. So this really does allow us, it's a multiplier. We get to then do additional management elsewhere with the receipts from timber sales.
Representative O'Brien.
When, say a ski area wants to build a new trail that's leasing FPR land or state land, do they have to go through something very similar then, as far as all those reviews? Like, a bat review, ecological review, historical, if they were, say, clearing a new trail on state-owned forest?
Sure, it's a great question. Leases are a different legal interest in the land. Many of them have, if not all of them, have Act 250 permits that apply to their activities. So the agencies has review process when there's an Act 250 permit involved. It still goes to the district stewardship team, those proposals for consideration and input back to the Act 250 process. We also advise them they have to do bat screening on all of their projects as well, for example. So many of the same processes will end up happening. It just might be sometimes be through a different pathway. They aren't going through the annual stewardship plan the way that our in-house projects do. That's a good question. All right, so stepping away from the forests, a little bit about actually managing trees and what else do we do? We do a lot of recreation and we manage a lot of historic resources. We have a range of recreation across seasons. It varies by ownership. On forest parks and recreation lands in particular, we have a lot of users and a lot of people with an interest in getting outdoors, and we're fortunate that there's so many different places spread across the state that they can get on to state lands and recreate, be outside, be in the woods. We get a lot of requests for different uses, and we have to maintain those existing resources and respond to those requests. And we also have a lot of historic resources, old CCC camps, cemeteries, lime kilns, archaeological resources that we need to manage and preserve on state lands. In terms of water quality and wildlife habitat,
Representative
Can I
Boswell.
just ask a quick question? So in terms of CCC camps, does just being a CCC camp make it officially anything? Because I actually have one on my property and there's no management whatsoever from any official entities. And I have a chimney, I have old foundations. So can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of, there's the National Historic Preservation Act.
Yep.
Declares anything over 50 years could be considered historically significant. So the first step is determining whether it is.
Yeah.
Some things are so modified, they've lost their historic
Yeah.
character or quality. So we have a lot of things out on state lands, and if we ever find one that might need management, we would engage our historic preservation office to help us determine if it's eligible for listing, if it has a historic significance. Some cases, we just have to prevent degradation. In some cases, we're actively restoring those structures with their guidance and advice to try and maintain them as an example of good historic.
So as a private landowner with something that is over 100 years, am I supposed to contact somebody? I mean, I literally have chimneys in my backyard that are from the 1930s.
So I can advise you on that.
Okay.
That'd be a great question for the Department of Historic Preservation.
Okay.
But in general, the way the requirement, like we have requirements for state and federal law that when funds are being used,
Yeah.
there's a certain level of review that has to, in consultation, that has to happen with SHPO. They are the state historic preservation officer, and they also love talking about historic structures and resources. So I'm sure you could probably get someone out to look at it if you're
Alright.
interested. But as far as your responsibilities, I can speak to this.
All right.
I guess just some of my metrics down at the bottom. I mentioned before, we have a lot of trail. We have 470 miles of vast trail. We maintain 37 shelters that are generally first come, first serve. And we have 8 historic fire towers on state lands that we maintain, just as an example of some of the recreation and historic features. For water quality and wildlife habitat, we do work with our fish and wildlife colleagues and incorporate directly into our management, work to create and maintain wildlife habitat through targeted tree release, through creating the different types of habitat. We also do some work on streams. We've been doing strategic woody additions or adding wood back into streams to create complexity in the river channel and restore historic straightening or channelizing of those channels. So we're doing, and then protecting cold water fisheries. There's a whole bunch of strategies we use in management to try and promote these resources as well. And connected to water quality, we have a lot of roads, as I mentioned before. We have almost 300 parking areas on state lands, some form or another. We've been fortunate to have a lot of clean water funds going into allowing us to upgrade roads. And we've really seen dividends in the last 2 floods where we've done clean water funded upgrades to roads. We have seen where we stop the work, looks great, and you go 1 segment down and the road is destroyed. So we're seeing these investments in our road infrastructure really paying off. And also this historic flooding that we've had for the last few summers has really taken my team a lot of work to fix, but we've been able to fix it right. And we're seeing it recover and, or even not be resilient to these high water events. So managing these accesses is how people get onto public land, either by car or on foot. And there's also how we get our management done on state lands by these roads. So the investment in this historic investment in this infrastructure has been, I think, a game changer for state lands recently. Person Lipsky.
Yeah, Jim, if you go back 1 slide, the right-hand photograph, were you creating woody debris there or removing woody debris from that stream?
Creating, adding to it.
And that wasn't in Nebraska Valley.
This project, I would have to get back to you where this one was.
Because the DEC had a lot of communities overseeing removal of large, basically walls of trees that washed out and were blocking the flow, and it caused maybe 85% in our community the damage was to public infrastructure, bridges, dams, bridges, roads, culverts. And they were very open to having some of these hazards removed, leaving some shading and material for habitat. But that sort of were whole trees folded over from both banks and really blocked flow. They were adamant about getting that out to protect public infrastructure.
And I think that last piece is really critical, right? Like how adjacent is this addition to existing infrastructure? And a lot of these projects will do in the higher order streams, so they wouldn't be right above a culvert or right above a roadway. We're really looking to restore these channels where we have cold water brook trout habitat or other fisheries habitat. And that siting and planning is really key so that you're not putting something in that you then will be dealing with in a different way.
The other thing I wanted to point out, when you were talking about the shelters that you have, when we were at that site visit, there was a sort of an aged out clapboard former farmhouse that the state is granted to create a future shelter or house for a hut system, which is expanding all over Vermont for whether you're outdoor, skimming, and which in Maine and other states have a lot of these connected hut systems, which is big outdoor recreation as well. That's particularly on state land, that project.
Yeah, a good example of a historic resource that we are trying to maintain or prevent from falling down.
Conserve or preserve.
This is my second to last slide. This is my last one. I've talked about a lot of management that we do as public land managers. This is most of the great team that does this and a lot of our some great colleagues from parks as well. It's a huge body of work. We do everything that a landowner does. Forest management is a huge component of that, and we're really proud of. And I'm just thankful to have an hour to talk with you all about it. Thank you for all the great questions, and happy to answer any more questions you might have.
Great, thank you. You have, at the end of the presentation, you touched a little bit on the other areas of management that you do, not just forest management, timber harvest, but you have 5 stewardship foresters who work under you, and then do you have other staff who focus on other areas as well?
So underneath the stewardship foresters, there's 2 state lands foresters per district. So they'll do everything from boundary maintenance, to mowing, to marking timber, to inventory, to writing plans. Then we have recreation specialists in 3 of our districts, in our central and northeastern districts. And that's pretty much it. So we draw a lot on our resources, like our watershed forester, forestry program manager, Dave Wilcox, is a huge asset to our program and helping advise us on roads. We don't have a roads department or facilities department that manages shelters. So the shelter is getting managed. It's our state lands forester, our stewardship foresters who are doing that as well.
Doing that. Are you, I know workforce comes up throughout the building in conversations, state workforce and private workforce, are all those positions filled, and have they been staffed recently for you?
We have one person who's starting in March. We had a retirement, and we're backfilling the twice vacated position as people moved around. And so we are going to be full up again at 19 on March 24th. That's our full workforce.
Is there any difference with your management plans on state parks versus state forests? I mean, state parks are smaller in a lot of ways, but I assume you do some forest management in some of the larger ones.
Yes. So I would say the management goals in part reflect the mission of the ownership. So a state park in the developed area has a certain part mission. Outside of the developed area might be supporting some recreational use from that park, or maybe not, depending on Hamilton State Park doesn't have a developed park site. So the overall planning will reflect the underlying ownership as well as the larger landscape goals. So we do have most of our state parks of any size also have active forest management happening in them. We've recently conducted harvests in Mount Ascutney State Park. Lowell Lake State Park has one that's ongoing. We've done some in Bomoseen State Park. So there's state parks are kind of actively managed as well because they contain the same matrix forest, natural communities, and potential needs for both active forest management and benefits to the state. Yes, we do active forest management in parks, and we coordinate that with our parks division. When it gets down to implementation at the planning scale, we're looking at the whole landscape and how do we allocate that land.
I was thinking as you're going through and you got to the end of this lengthy explanation of what it all entails, whether private landowner who was considering, who had a management plan, had land in current use, had a management plan, would be going through the same process in microcosm? Or is it much more strict at the state level just because it's state land?
I don't know if I'd use the word strict, but it
Probably not
is
the right word.
comprehensive. I think we're looking at, we have the benefit of a much larger scale of ownership, so we can contemplate management actions at a 20-year time horizon across thousands of acres. And I think that just leads to a different mindset when planning. And then our resource assessments, I think, tend to be more extensive because we're looking at a wider range of goals, and we see this opportunity to not only benefit forests, we can benefit fisheries or people's use of the landscape. So we have to integrate so many other uses. You need more information to be able to do that. So I'd say it's just a different mandate and a different scale that we have to operate at when management planning for a larger ownership.
Well, I think this was really informative, and the timing works out well because tomorrow, Friday, we're going to have the department back in for the budget presentation, like we had yesterday for the ag agency, with every line basically explained. We'll see something comparable, I think, from Forest Parks and Recreation, and part of it will be your area. So it'll help us understand a little bit better what we're looking at then. So with that, unless there are any other questions, well, okay, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.